part in the contract that talks about repairs. So I want to make sure that you guys know this is very interactive. This is not just me talking. Please feel free to jump in at any point in time and ask a question. Stop me if you don't understand something, because I want to make sure that everybody understands everything there is about repairs, because especially, well, it's important in any market, but it's real important in this market. So any questions before I start? Okay. So we're going to start in the contract for sale. This is a purchase contract. This is page 3, paragraph 9, repairs. And if you'll notice, it says check. If you'll notice right here in the first paragraph under paragraph 8, it says check only one of the following options. If no boxes are checked, this contract will be an as-is contract in regards to repairs. And you do not want that at all, and I'll go over that in a few minutes. If multiple repair boxes are checked, then the first paragraph with the check box will determine repairs. So if you accidentally check repair procedure and then due diligence, your contract is going to be a repair procedure. If you accidentally check due diligence and as is, your contract is going to be a due diligence, because it's going to pick up the first one. So in the first line in the regular repair procedure, it says all repair procedure inspections and requests shall be completed and delivered to the seller by 6:00 p.m. on, this is the hard date that they changed this to. It used to be a number of business days. Now it is actually a hard date. So you have to put a date in there. You want to make sure, knowing how busy all of our vendors are, you want to make sure that you allow enough time in there. So usually from the day that you anticipate that everybody's going to sign your contract, you want to allow at least 2 weeks in there. So that would give like 10 business days. So you want to check and make sure that when you click the date right here, that it's, if you figure that everybody's going to sign on the 14th, you want to give yourself 2 weeks. So make that date the 28th. Any and all requests necessary to place the heating system, air conditioning system, electrical system, plumbing system, wastewater, water supply to be conveyed in operative condition. So that means that these systems have to work. It does not mean that they have to be brand new. It doesn't mean that they can't be 20 years old. It means that they have to be passed on to the new buyer in operable condition to make the roof free of leaks. That does not mean that if they're 20-year shingles and they're 19 years old and the inspector comes up and says the roof is at the end of its life, that does not mean that the buyer has the right to ask the seller for a new roof if it is not leaking. These are things, guys, that you have to make sure that you go over with your buyers at the time that you're writing this contract. Because if you wait until you're into your repair section, you've already agreed upon the contract and you hired your home inspector, and then your report comes back and you start to explain all this to your clients, you're too late. You're too late and you're gonna have problems. You have to explain this at the time that you're writing this offer for your clients so that they can be prepared, so that when the report comes back, you can say, remember, we have this conversation. We don't look at this, this, and this. Otherwise, a lot of them, especially first-time homebuyers, are going to be freaked out by the inspection report because there's going to be so much stuff in there, including a lot of cosmetic issues, which we're not supposed to look for. So let's go on to address environmental concerns and to make the improvement structurally sound. So environmental concerns means mold, radon, anything like that. And to make the property structurally sound, if any structural issues were found during the home inspection, then those are things that we need to address. If the buyer fails to notify the seller within this time frame, The buyer shall have waived any rights under terms of this section. So you, as the buyer representative, you have to make sure that you have your dates documented on your phone, on your Google Calendar, everywhere, so that you know never to let that time period lapse before you respond. Otherwise, what you have just done is you've laid any problems with that inspection report in your buyer's lap. It's no longer the seller's responsibility. That's not going to go over well. If lender's commitment requires any additional inspections or certifications, these are to be provided by the buyer. Where this could come in is if it is a VA, USDA, or FHA. They have their own, when their appraisers go out, they also do inspections. It's not like a home inspection, but they do inspections. So if any of those things are required by any of those, that's at the buyer's expense. Buyer at buyer's expense shall have, okay, I want you to really pay attention to this. This is something you have to make sure your buyers understand at the time you're writing the contract. Buyer at buyer's expense shall have the privilege and responsibility of inspecting the structure, square footage, environmental concerns, including but not limited to mold, radon gas, lead-based paint hazards, including lead-based paint, wetland studies, appurtenant buildings, heating systems, air conditioning systems, electrical systems, plumbing systems, water supply, wastewater supply as well, and appliances. Upon seller's request, the buyer will provide a copy of the inspection report. So when your buyers can have any of these reports done. That's in addition to the home inspection. They can have a radon inspection. They could have a septic inspection. They can have any of these inspections, but they have to do that during their inspection period. Upon seller's request, buyer will provide a copy of the inspection report. If you send an inspection, if you send a repair addendum over to a seller and you say, I want all of these things repaired, they are not going to know half of what you're talking about unless they have something to go by. A lot of home inspectors will do a summary report. So you can send that summary report as long as it's detailed and has the photographs to go along with it. Otherwise, you're going to have to send the repair addendum, the inspection report over so that they can see that. No later than, any questions on that paragraph first before I move on? Okay. No later than 6 p.m. on blank date, and that's another hard date, the seller shall deliver notice agreeing or not agreeing to make repairs in the buyer's repair request. The cost of all repairs, now this goes back to those major components, the cost of all repairs to heating system, air conditioning system, electrical, plumbing, water, wastewater, making these systems operable, making the roof free of leaks, addressing environmental concerns, and to make improvements structurally sound are to be paid for by the seller. Seller paid repairs. Seller paid requests do not include home maintenance, flooring, fogged windows, grandfathered code issues. So if you have a 1970s brick ranch and the inspector said that none of these outlets are grounded and they're not GFI, that's not the seller's responsibility to bring that up to today's codes. As long as they are working, then the buyer has to be okay with that. The other thing is, just an FYI, is in a 1970s house that was not grounded, does not have updated wiring, that was not grounded and does not have GFIs, you can't just go put GFIs and you can't just go ground the wires. You could, but they're not going to work in the manner that they need to work. So don't let anybody tell you that, let's just have them put GFIs in there. It's not going to work. Your buyer either has to accept it the way it is if there are no issues, or they don't have to buy the house. Let's see, where was I? The repairs to any other items are the sole responsibility of the buyer. So the repairs to fogged windows, the repairs to flaky paint, the repairs to, light bulbs that are out or whatever, those are the sole responsibility of the buyer, not the seller, unless they are agreed to in the repair addendum. If the seller does not timely respond per above or does not agree to make all the seller paid repairs, the buyer shall within 2 calendar days, the buyer shall within 2 calendar days choose any one of the following options: accept the property in its present condition, negotiate a new or amended contract with the seller for the payment of this repairs. In other words, say, okay, I'm not going to pay you 200, I'll pay you 195, or I'll pay you 197, or you'll pay 2,000 of my closing costs in lieu of any repairs, anything like that. Accept the property in its present condition, or I'm sorry, I read that. Number 3, terminate this contract by delivered notice. Delivered notice is written notice. If buyer fails to accept, renegotiate, or negotiate an amended contract or terminate the contract, the buyer agrees to buy and the seller agrees to sell the property as is. Parties agree as is means buyer buys the property for the purchase price while seller maintains the property from the effective date through closing, subject to normal wear and tear, otherwise without repair or replacement, and sells the property for the purchase price unless otherwise agreed to in writing by all parties. And I want you to remember this last sentence, and then I'm going to tell you why. The obligations of the seller for repairs terminate upon closing. So if your buyers come back after closing and say, you know what, I don't like the way they repaired this, or they forgot to repair that, I'm sorry, Mr. Buyer, but the obligations of the seller for repairs terminate at closing. It is the buyer's responsibility to either have it re-inspected or to inspect each of those items on a walkthrough prior to closing. They can't come back after closing and expect the seller to go back and do something because the contract says no. Explain that to your clients and make sure that they understand that they have the choice to have it re-inspected at their cost, or that you guys can go through each item on your final walkthrough. By the way, make sure that you do a final walkthrough before you go to closing to cover your rear end and to save any future problems like this. When you do your final walkthrough, try not to do that days before closing. Try to do that as close to closing as possible, because I really like to make sure that I am the last one in that house before closing to make sure that they didn't take something they weren't supposed to take, or that there wasn't any damage done and move out. If you want to go before closing and re-inspect on your own, you and your buyers, if they don't want to hire somebody to go back out, you can do that, but then you need to do your final walkthrough again right before you go to closing to make sure they didn't take that refrigerator or that washer and dryer, they didn't switch the stove out, take the blinds, take the curtains, or gouge holes in the hardwoods. So make sure you do that. Okay, we're going to move on to the due diligence. Any questions about the repair addendum? The repair section. Okay, due diligence means basically you have an effective date that expires on such and such a date. The due diligence period begins upon the effective date of the contract. That is the date that the last person signed, and that is a fully executed contract, and shall expire at 6 p.m. on blank date. Again, make this about 2 weeks. What that means is you have to have all and any inspections done during that inspection period. Everything you want done has to be done during that inspection period. And do not wait until the last day. Get that done immediately. Get those inspections done immediately. Get your repair request to the seller. Do not wait until the last minute on this particular date that you choose It's not like a repair request. A repair request, the seller has 2 calendar days afterwards, not on a due diligence. On a due diligence, that's the entire time right there that you have to get your inspections done, get your repair request to the seller, and the seller to respond. So make sure that you allow enough time for the seller to review and respond. A lot of people do not realize that. Buyer may take timely, prudent steps to help buyer inspectors, seller estimators, and realtors all have adequate time for buyer to coordinate inspections and repair requests, seller to obtain estimates, buyer and seller to negotiate repairs, and buyer to potentially timely report due diligence. Potentially timely, properly due diligence, terminate, or buy. That's to make their decision. During the due diligence period, seller agrees buyer may rely on the following list of items in accordance with the contract and laws. Buyer is solely responsible for inspections. Buyer is not required to inspect. A buyer is never required to inspect. Until buyer timely, properly terminates the contract or the parties agree on amended contract, the buyer can rely on number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Time is of the essence. Delivering repair request does not extend the due diligence period. That's what I was saying earlier. Just because you deliver it on the day that the due diligence expires, it does not extend the due diligence period. What that means is you're not being fair to the seller and you're not giving them the amount of time they need to be able to do their due diligence. Number 1, obtain inspections, deliver repairs notice, proceed under amended contract, proceed under as is, terminate contract. Termination, seller, during the due diligence period, buyer may unilaterally terminate this contract only by delivering to the seller both notice of termination and a termination fee of blank. So the buyer has put down an earnest money deposit on the house. If buyer chooses to do a due diligence, buyer may unilaterally terminate this contract. That means the buyer can walk away from a due diligence for any reason. Is it fair to a seller that you choose the due diligence part of the repair addendum? You put down $2,000 earnest money, you tie up their property for 2 weeks, and then the buyer changes their mind because the house they really wanted just came back on the market, and they decide to terminate the contract for no reason. That's the reason why we have a termination fee in here. Now, remember, when you're working with a buyer, your job is to represent that buyer and look out for their best interest. So you want this, so if you put down $1,000 earnest money, you want this to be, you're looking out for your buyer. You want this to be $250, $500. You don't want to give away all your earnest money for your buyer. If you're representing a seller and a buyer has $2,000 earnest money, they can walk away at any point in time, and the buyer's agent puts $250 in here. Representing the seller, you may want to come back and change this to 500 or 1,000. So it's according to which hat will vary as to the number that goes in that box. All right. Any questions on due diligence before we move on to as is?
I do have a question.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
No,
So
you're good.
on the due diligence, we had one of my clients did, and it's still about this land. But there was a due diligence, and he wanted to go ahead and get out of it because there were so many issues, things coming up. He signed it in time. I sent it to the other agent like a week ago. He has not returned it to me. He sent me a text saying he was going to return it last week. I've called him, texted him several times. He said that he would have it. I think the last time was maybe Friday of last week, said he would have it to me that afternoon. I have not seen the form yet.
Okay. All right, have you reached out to that agent's broker?
I have not, think he is a broker, to be honest. I will check though.
Okay, so on the day that it actually terminates, that hard date, if you have not heard from that agent, that's when you reach out to that agent's broker and you say, I need it by this date. You know, I can always make that phone call to the agent, but you need to exhaust all of your options first. So he has not responded to your termination.
Yes, he said that he was going to get his client to sign it. He told me that. He sent me a text and said that because it's every time we would have something, a form to be filled out, it's like he has to print the form out or whatever and take it to the person. And it's like a week, in between before they get things done. I'm like, what is going on? So anyway, the last time, I can't remember the day, but anyway, it's been a week now. I know that the form was sent to him. He told me he received it and that he was going to take care of it.
I have a question for you. Did you have a termination fee in there?
To be honest, I can't remember at this moment. Let me look. I can check. I'll check.
Reason I'm asking is this paragraph says during the due diligence period, buyer may unilaterally terminate this contract only by delivering the seller both notice of termination and a termination fee. If this says zero right here, and they signed this contract with that being a zero, your only responsibility is to deliver this notice of termination within that period. The buyer terminated that contract.
Okay. I will look at it.
Okay, that is what the contract says. Now, we do have termination documents that are, supposed to be signed by both buyer and seller, but
Right.
contractually, it says buyer may unilaterally terminate this contract by delivering to the seller both notice of termination and a termination fee of zero. So if it's zero, this is the only thing that buyer has to do. This is the reason why a lot of sellers don't like due diligence in the repair section, because the buyer can just walk away.
Okay.
Okay.
No, thank you.
I would still go after that termination document, because just, to cover your behind and the brokerage is behind, I always still like to have that.
Oh, I have it.
Actually, was that a zero? Did you look?
I'm trying to find it. Hold on.
Okay.
I'll let you know in just a minute.
Okay. Any other questions about due diligence? Okay. Now we're going to go to the as is, which is the part of the contract that I absolutely hate, and I never want you to use this unless, and I'll tell you what the unless is in a second. All parties agree that property is being sold as is. As is means buyer buys the property for the purchase price while the seller maintains the property from the effective date through closing, subject to normal wear and tear, without repair or replacement, and sells the property for the purchase price unless otherwise agreed to in writing by both parties in this contract. Buyer retains the right to inspect the property by 6 o'clock p.m. on this hard date for inspections. Okay, here's the reason why I never want you to use this. And the buyer may not terminate the contract based on the results of any inspections conducted. I'm going to read that again. The buyer may not terminate the contract based on the results of any inspections conducted. If you're trying to win a contract in all of these crazy multiple offers and you think, okay, well, we're going to buy this, we're going to check as is, because the buyer is not going to ask for any repairs. Okay. You go in, your buyer has the inspection report done. The heating and air is bad. The roof is leaking. There are major structural issues in the house. It's just there's mold. It's just a financial nightmare. Buyer may not terminate the contract based on the results of any inspections conducted. You do not want to check this box right here unless you are working with an investor and he's going to flip this property and he knows that he's going to go in and gut this house. That is the only time you want to check this box. If you're trying to win multiple offers and you want the cleanest, clearest contract possible to try and win, you want to use the repair addendum, and you want to just make a note on, you just want to attach like a blank addendum. And the addendum says, buyer has the right to inspect, but chooses not to, but buyer will not ask sellers for any repairs under $2,000 or any repairs under $3,000 or whatever the buyer agrees to. So that's telling the seller that they're not going to be looking at any of the little minute, minor things in the house. They're only going to be looking at the major issues. I have won multiple offers using that terminology. I even sometimes, cross through repair procedure. Well, actually, what I do is in dot loop, I add a strike through in repair or across this paragraph. I add a strike through across due diligence. I add a strike through across as is. I add a blank addendum, and that's where I say buyer has the right to inspect and will not ask sellers for any repairs under whatever amount that is, because it looks like you're not asking for all these things, but you are adding it to an addendum. It's just kind of a little trick of the trade there when we're in this crazy crazy multiple offer situations.
Hey, Pat.
Yes.
On the on the due diligence versus the repair addendum.
Yes.
I mean, if you're representing a seller, does it just make sense to just do the repair addendum? Or, I mean, do you almost have to concede to due diligence?
You don't have, if you're representing a seller, you don't have to concede to anything.
Okay. So you can just do the repair addendum in lieu of the due diligence. And
well, that's your negotiation with that buyer. So that buyer, you could have 5 offers, right? 5 offers on your property for your seller. And this one offer is the best offer out of all of them by far. And that's the one your seller wants, but they chose a due diligence. Cross through the due diligence, add the repair addendum, have your seller initial and date that change. Send that back, let the other agent know we are going to accept your offer with one change, and that's we're doing away with the due diligence and we're adding the repair section.
Okay. Thank you.
Either that, or if you want to keep the due diligence, if they put down $2,000 earnest money, change the amount in the termination fee in the due diligence to $2,000. Because if you got multiple offers and you had to turn around and put it back on the market again, you're going to get multiple offers again, and then your seller's just got to keep $2,000.
Right. I got you.
Okay, that's everything. Everything is, when you represent the seller, everything is negotiable. Your seller doesn't have to accept anything.
Okay.
And even though, let me point this out, because a lot of people don't understand this, in the repair section, where it says that the seller's responsibilities are all of these things at the seller's expense. That is only if the seller chooses to do those things. This does not mandate that the seller do anything. The roof could be leaking and the seller says, I'm not fixing it. The heating and air could be on its last leg and not working right, and the seller could say, I'm not fixing it. It's all negotiable. The reason that they changed this contract a couple of years ago and put this in here the way they did is to try and keep all of the cosmetic issues and all the minor stuff out of the contracts. Even though the inspectors feel like, they have to earn their, $400 inspection fees, and they add all this stuff in there. It's just a nightmare really for buyers and sellers. So that's why they stepped in, LLR stepped in and changed this and actually outlined all these things, basically to tell the buyer, these are the things you should be looking at, that you should be asking the seller for if there's a problem. That does not mean that the seller has to do any of those things. So please make sure your buyers understand that. Any questions?
No, so actually we have 0 in there in that box.
Okay,
It
then
says termination fee of 0.
you've terminated that contract.
Okay,
I still
So
would
he
like
could-
for you to try and get it signed, the addendum signed, but
I'm waiting.
technically, contractually, the contract was terminated.
Okay. All right. So
Now-
so my buyer can get his money from the attorney. Can I notify them? Because I had notified the attorney, a couple of weeks ago that he was going to terminate anyway.
Yeah, every attorney has his own policy for releasing earnest money.
Right.
So your buyer signed the termination of contract, and if I were you, I would send that along with the copy of the contract with that highlighted in there, and highlight all that and send that to the attorney.
Okay.
The attorney may or may not release that earnest money, waiting on that, that other addendum to be signed. It depends upon how what their release of earnest money process is, because they each have their own.
Okay.
But your buyer is released from that contract.
Okay.
Okay?
All right. Thank you.
Welcome. So now we have chosen either the repair addendum or we have chosen the due diligence. So we've chosen either the repair section of the contract or the due diligence. So now it is time to put our requested repairs in writing. What you want to do here is, here's our repair addendum, put the address, the full address of the property in here. Repairs, parties agree that at seller's expense, good faith, timely manner, it goes on. Parties agree that their intent in this contract is that sellers always hire qualified repair workers, contractors, electricians, plumbers, for all repairs except the most basic repairs that the seller might be adequately qualified to do. So this is where you would write in, if you wanted to utilize this line, you could write in seller to only use licensed contractors. Seller can handle repairs of painting or whatever. I typically don't use this line. I'll tell you why in a second. Repair related items inspection reports are or are not attached. So you should check are and you should attach those, because like I said before, they don't know what they're repairing unless they see it. They don't know, they don't know. They may repair something that's not quite right. Parties agree that the seller shall complete the repairs no later than blank calendar days prior to closing. Closing is the repair deadline. Remember what I said, that sellers are not responsible for any repairs after closing. So what you want to do is there's three calendar dates here. You want to make sure that you give them enough time to do the repairs, to let you come back in and re-inspect. And if there's anything wrong, that they have enough time here before closing to get those re-inspected items done. I would typically say no later than, it really depends on how long your closing period is. If it's 30 days, if it's, 45 days, but typically if it's a 30-day closing, I would say no later than 10 calendar days prior to closing, 7 calendar days to re-inspect, and 3 calendar days to get it corrected so you can come back in again. Best practice is to insert descending numbers in these blanks. Any repairs not covered by contract become the responsibility of the buyer upon closing. Best practices for agreeing upon repairs are to write in the blank lines below. So I'm not going to read all this, although it says seller paid repairs is not applicable in due diligence. In due diligence, party can agree in writing on the on the companies and personnel who can conduct the repair actions. If seller successfully completes the repair agreement, buyer shall comply with the contract terms. If seller fails to complete repairs agreed upon in the repair agreement, the buyer shall accept the property in its present condition, negotiate to reach agreement with the seller for different terms, other repair compensation, price reduction, escrow, whatever, terminate this agreement by delivering notice and potentially seeking legal remedies against the seller. The buyer has invested money in these inspections. The seller agreed to make these repairs. And then he's going to go back and he's going to say, you know what, I changed my mind, I'm not doing this. Yeah, you are. You're fixing this one way or the other. So on your inspection reports, what you need to do, and you need to do this for 2 reasons. 1, to keep it clean and clear. Number 2, to make it, 3 reasons, to make it much easier to read. And number 3, to not freak out the seller. So what you need to do is, let's just say that the first issue is roof. So let's type in the word roof. Underneath the roof, you want to list each of the items in the inspection report that you're going to be asking the seller to address. And the way you want to do that is in the inspection report, it'll have a page number and an item number. So you want to write page 3, 1.2a, or however it's worded. And then you want to copy what it says. Don't copy all the, because inspectors have a tendency to ramble on and on and on and on. I suggest you do this and this and this. Get rid of all that. The flashing is not attached to the roof. That's the major issue. Write it in there. And then say licensed, actually beside the word roof, in like right here when you type roof, I would say licensed roofing contractor to inspect, repair as needed. That means that anything that pertains to that roof is going to be a licensed roofing contractor. And then under that, you're going to have page 3, 1.2. And then you're going to have page 5, 3.1. However it's listed, on your inspection report. Flashing, and then maybe this is the gutters falling off or something. If you do it this way, If you outline each item, the seller can look at this and say, okay, well, there's 6 roofing items. So that's just one contractor. But when it's not listed this way on your repair addendum and they're reading through all these things, they see roof and then they see electrical, and they see plumbing, and then they see handyman, and then they see roof and electrical and plumbing. They're like freaking out all over the place. If you categorize these, it makes it a lot easier for the seller to see, oh, okay, here's a roofer and all they have to do is fix the flashing and the gutters. Does that make sense? Electric, I'm always going to say licensed electrician to inspect, repair as needed. And then I'm going to have the same thing, page 6, 2.0, and I'm going to have that listed out. And I'm going to go through and list anything that my buyer has requested under electric. And then let's just say that, let's just do this. Doors. Seller can repair or use handyman. Page 4, 1.2, back door deadbolt needs adjusting. I would encourage the buyer not to ask for that, but you know, if it's a single lady and she doesn't know how to do anything, or you know, whatever, and they really want them to fix that, I would say the seller can repair or use a handyman. You don't need a licensed contractor for that. And you would just go on through this, and that's how you would do your repair addendum. The buyer has to initial, the seller has to initial. Let's just say that later on, when this comes back from the seller has all right, let's just say the seller has put a strike through on this. They put a strike through here and said, no, we're not going to do this. The seller has to every seller has to initial and date the change, and every buyer has to initial and date the change if they agree upon that. Any change to any contract that we use in this brokerage, I want every name that is on that contract, every buyer, if there's 6 buyers, if there's 25 sellers, if there's a change on that contract, I want 25 seller initials and dates, and I want 15 buyer initial and dates. I'm not going to accept a contract for compliance if there is an initial missing. So please be sure that you have any change on any contract initial. If I go back to the purchase contract, you go down to, and this is a common problem that I see in all of our documents coming in for compliance. Parties shall initial and date all changes in this contract and initial all pages. Parties shall initial and date, parties meaning all, initial and date all changes. A lot of people forget to initial and date, and then we can have some big issues. LLR says that this part of the contract, right here, this paragraph, is for repair addendums. They say that this page is for due diligence repairs. They say you shouldn't carry over your repairs on this part of the contract because this was intended for due diligence repairs here. Because it goes on to talk, and it talks about, you know, due diligence form, right, to terminate. However, most people do. If you have a lot of repairs, most people just continue on down, and I do the same thing as well. So I just wanted you to know what LLR says, but it's okay if you do it that way. Everybody has to initial and sign. Expiration, when signed by a party and intended as a proposed addendum to the contract, this document represents a proposed addendum to the other party that may be rescinded at any time or expires at blank. What that means is if you choose to put a date in here, you don't have to, but if you choose to put a date in here and the seller has not responded to your client, like you sent over 2 pages of, you sent over a page of repairs, and then you're looking back through it, or they're looking back through it, you say, oh man, we forgot to add the loose toilets on, in every bathroom. If they have not accepted this or countered this by this date, you can rescind that document by submitting written notice. You can go back in and add your other item and then resend it. That is what this date is for. Any questions on the repair addendum? Is this actually in our repair class? So any questions on anything that I have gone through today? I did a great job. Nobody has questions? Anybody have questions about something that they see on inspection reports that they might not understand what they are or how to explain those to clients? Okay, everybody's good? All right. If anybody thinks of any questions or has any questions, or when you're doing these, if you have any problems, please reach out to me. I am here for you. That's what my job is. I'm here for you guys. Just remember, if you forget everything I said today, which I hope you don't, but if you do, just remember, go over your repair section, your due diligence, your repair addendum, go over all those things at the time that you're writing your contract so that your clients are prepared. The same thing as if you were a seller. When you're listing that house, go over those paragraphs so that your sellers are prepared. Because if your sellers get a repair addendum that is 2 pages long and then continues on a blank addendum because there wasn't enough room, they're gonna freak out. So go over that so that you can say, remember, we talked about this. This is not abnormal. Let's just take it item by item. What I do, and this is me, but what I do when I get the the repair addendum back, along with the inspection report, I go through the inspection report and the repair addendum. If I am working with a seller, I make a note and highlight to the seller the things that are really important that I think that they need to address. They may add a few things. I've had sellers take away from my suggestion and say, no, we can do that. If you're working with a buyer and the inspection report comes in, if I were you, I'd take the inspection report. I would do a repair addendum for them before you send them the inspection report. I would put all of the things that are contractual in there because you're going that one step ahead and you're helping them sort it out and understand. Then I send them the inspection report and I send them the repair addendum. And I tell them, look through the inspection report and look through the repair addendum that I have created. Let me know if there's anything that you want to add to it or take away from it, or if you have questions about anything, or if I can explain, or if it looks perfect to you and that's the way you would have created it. You wouldn't believe how much of a help that is to buyers and how much they appreciate that. But on the flip side, how you're saving yourself a lot of negotiating time and, you know, going back and forth and a lot of headaches and a lot of problems. So try it and see how that works out. Use your contract to go through and pick those items out, but make sure that you tell, you know, your seller or your buyer that, you know, what you're doing and that this is just preliminary for them to look at. Any questions? If not, you guys have a great.
Hey, Pat,
Yes.
this is an offline question. What do we do? What's the company that we need to correspond with about getting signage and collateral?
Sarah, can you answer that?
I need to contact them, and I didn't get
Give me
that.
1 second.
Okay.
Sarah's kind of putting all that together. That's why I asked you to answer that for you.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. We are using, it's Print Tech, but we're having trouble with them. So just so you know, we've had some communication issues with them. You're more than welcome to try them. As far as signs go, though, we did have someone reach out and do Sign Source recently, and they were able to get their signs pretty quickly.
Now,
But
can they
it's Print
do?
Tech. Go ahead.
Can they do like large signs, like for land tracks?
To the best of my knowledge, they can do any kind of signage that you want. It's Sign Source. Call
Okay.
them first for signage right now, just because I'm really having to deal with an issue on the other side.
I
So
got you. Do you have their number?
I do not. I'm sure, I cannot remember who just used them. I think Lisa used them just a little bit ago. Lisa, did you Google them or how did you find their number? She was on here. I'll text Lisa. I see she's on here, but she may have stepped away from her computer.
Okay.
I will, she said she got it on Yelp. She got the number on Yelp.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, guys, have a great rest of your week and thank you for joining my class.
Thank you,
Thank
Pat.
you. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you, Pat.
Great day.
Bye.